Hi everyone, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here. And since last week's show was quite long and featured a lot of strategic positions and some deep endgames, I thought I would do just the opposite this week and do a relatively quick show, and one which features some interesting opening play, really I think the end of one particular major plan in one opening, and involves nothing but pure tactics after a certain point and a king hunt. So a nice little change of pace from last week's rook endgame heavy show on viewer games. All right, so this was played in the Aeroflot Open. White was Ivan Cheparinov, the strong young Bulgarian player and frequent Topalov second. Black is a strong young, I believe, Spanish grandmaster, Ivan Salgado Lopez. Let me check and make sure if he's from Spain. Yep, he's from Spain. So they're both, Salgado Lopez is 20, Cheparinov is about 25 or so. Okay, well, let's take a look at the game. So it's a Blumenfeld gambit, which is a very sharp, very interesting way for Black to play. Certainly a quite dynamic approach. And here White has a choice between two major systems. There's the pawn grab line with d takes e6, fe6, c takes b5, d5, and Black obviously has this very nice center, but White has various ways to try to take some cracks at it, most notably with e4 at some point. But it's certainly a dangerous way for White to play. Certainly at the club level, I think it's relatively hard to play like this. So certainly the system Cheparinov plays is also quite reputable. It's not just that it's more solid, but I think it's completely fine as well. Now here, Black has two major ways of handling this. One is to play e takes d5, c d5, and then d6. So this is a relatively solid approach going into kind of a funny modern Benoni where Black has already achieved b5 for free, but it's not clear that this is all that it might be cracked up to be. So e4, White gets this in quite easily, a6, and now a4 attempts to show that these pawns are overextended. And after bishop to e7, we have various complications here. White's e-pawn could become vulnerable. Well, it's threatened outright. And in some positions there could be some knight takes d5 tricks, although not here because of the loose rook on a8. Anyway, very interesting position. Lots of tactics, lots of imbalances here. But this isn't how the game went. So Salgado went for the traditional move, or the old-fashioned, I guess, move, queen to a5 check. And here I guess the main move is queen to d2, but knight b to d2 scores the best out of them by far, and it just makes a lot of sense as well. All right, so Black plays b takes c4. This is the usual move, although, okay, I haven't looked at it too much, but bishop to e7, while rarely played, does score better, although because it's more rarely played, it's hard to know if that's really a representative, if its score is really representative or not. So I just give this to you as an option for those of you who play the Blumenfeld. Okay, so b takes c4, and now White's concept is to take and play e4, aiming to, of course, regain this c pawn, and in compensation for Black's having the bishop pair, White, of course, hopes to dominate in the center and even try to blast it open, since it's not really clear where Black's king is going to be tremendously safe. I mean, there are certainly gaps on both flanks, and while Black has a lot of pawns in front of him in the center, White is well represented there as well, and can certainly start to crack at the shell around the Black king, as we'll see. Okay, well here Black goes for what seems to be the most typical plan in this position. It looks fairly ridiculous, especially when you see what happens in this game, but it had done, okay, not great, but it had fair results up to the present time. So Black plays rook to g8, White plays g3, wants to develop the bishop. Not necessarily a fianchetto it, but he wants to develop it without allowing rook takes g2. Now rook to g4. Okay, I would say maybe in the future if black goes down this path at all, maybe c3 will be the way to go. Or again, maybe some different move instead of rook to g8. But anyway, rook g8, g3, rook g4. All right, now here two moves have been played in the past. One move was queen to c2, defending the pawn. And, okay, black played f5 in a game between Hans Rey and Friso Nebor. And here Rey went wrong immediately in Groningen in 2003 with bishop to g2. After rook takes e4 check, he was already much worse, and he lost rather quickly and badly. So just to quickly look at that game, king f1, e takes d5, knight e4. Here I think the better move would just be f takes e4 with a practically winning position. Okay, d takes e4 is not so terrible. White tried to be clever with rook to d1, stopping d5, and of course if e takes f3, bishop f3, if knight c6, maybe takes, and the center opens up. But black just calmly played knight to c6. And now with the knight moving, the knight comes into d4, and clearly white is just dead here. And the game only goes 5 more moves. Queen c3, queen a4, hitting the rook. Rey decided to swap, or to give up the exchange, to hopefully get some play with his queen and with the knight on h4, but it's not to be. Bishop to g7 is nice, because queen takes g7, queen d1 is mate. Okay, queen d6, still hoping to play knight takes f5 and to create some threats, but black is first. c3, okay, b takes c3, rook to b8, threatening rook to b1, knight takes f5, and now queen to c4 check, and Hans Rey resigned. King to g1, rook to b1 is mate in a couple, just a couple of spite interpositions, and then it's over. And king to e1, bishop takes c3, or queen takes c3 is lethal as well. Okay, so after rook to g4, queen c2 was a disaster, although this might be okay, but after f5, bishop g2 is bad. An interesting move, though, was bishop to h3. This was played in a game Nordahl against Fosen in Sandnes in Norway in 2005. And I think this is probably slightly better for white, at least. So if rook to g8, then queen c2, and now I think white's a little bit better. The queen on c2 not only protects e4, but it also at least eyes indirectly the h7 pawn. So white should be a bit better there. If rook takes e4, then king f1. Black's best here is probably rook to d4, and this is not entirely clear. So white gets his material, very, very small material advantage. Actually, no, I'm sorry, let me take that back. He doesn't get a material advantage at all. It's actually even, although probably the d4 pawn, of course, is going to drop sooner or later. But black has pretty good counterplay with his bishops and with white's somewhat awkward development. So this is not completely clear. Finally, okay, there's, as I said, the Nordahl-Fosen game continued with rook to g7, and after white castled, he was rather better. So rook takes e4 check would be the principled line here. Okay, well, let's see what Cheparinov played. He played bishop to e2, and this seems to be the best of all. All right, so it's a new move, and now we have to ask, well, what the heck is black doing? The only move that makes any sense here, otherwise his last two moves are absolutely absurd, is rook takes e4, and this is what he played. But now white just castles. All right, so now black has gone on this with this Excelsior rook, and he continues with rook takes e2, just kind of finishing the job. So it goes to h8, right, from h8 to g8 to g4 to e4 to e2. All this to lose material. But let's see what else he could have done. Probably the best was just to go back out, rook to g4, and we can maybe jokingly say that he's threatening to go to g8. But here's in trouble. Still, white has to play accurately. Knight to e5 looks interesting, and if black plays f takes e5, which certainly looks reasonable. I mean, bishop g4, e takes d5 at first glance looks pretty good for black. He's got 3 pawns for the exchange and this colossal pawn center. But the problem is that it collapses. After bishop to f3, white threatens not only bishop takes d5, but knight takes c4 as well. And e4 doesn't stop anything. White just plays knight takes e4. Again, if d takes e4, bishop takes e4, it's kind of like the one line we saw in the Rey Neighbor game. And just with the open lines in the center, black's king is going to perish. Okay, But after knight to e5, the peripatetic rook can go to d4 now, taking advantage of the pin on the knight on d2. And after knight e takes c4, queen c7, the position is unclear. White's down a pawn, certainly has compensation, but it's far from clear what's going on here. So better than knight to e5, I think, is knight to c4. Queen c7, and now, let me punctuate here. After queen c7, knight f to e5 is a blunder this time because of rook to d4. h3 is interesting, and now black can consider a few moves. Probably the best is rook to g7. After knight to h2, it's equal, or maybe black's just a little bit worse here. Rook to g8 is certainly playable, but again, white's a little bit better after this. What black probably shouldn't do is play rook takes g3. This doesn't seem to work, although it's not 100% clear. fg, okay, and we take. And now, okay, not this, because the bishop on f3 just kills the attack completely. But bishop to b7 first. And it's always a good rule of thumb when you're considering tactical sequences. Often if a followed by b isn't so great, you should at least consider b followed by a. Often that will do the trick. That'll fix what's lacking in the other order. So bishop to b7, and now there's no bishop to f3. And on knight h2, bishop takes d5, bishop f3. Well, black isn't playing queen takes h3, but bishop takes c4. Bishop a8, bishop d6. So there's still some life here. White is better to be sure, but it's certainly an odd position. I mean, black has 4 pawns for a rook, and certainly white should be favored, but it's kind of hard to break in to that into the black position. That little turtle shell of pawns around the black king is fairly compact, fairly tight, not very easy to get at all. So black should avoid this, but it's not clear that this is a win. Anyway, instead of h3 though, which is not bad, probably the best, as I said. Sorry, let me draw up this. Instead of h3, because I think rook g7, knight h2 is only a tiny bit better for white. Better is knight to e3. And then on all these rook retreats, I think white has a more substantial edge. So for instance, on rook to g7, rook e1 is nice. On rook to b4, then queen c2, and we're eyeing the h7 pawn. And if rook to g8, most natural move, then rook e1, bishop e7, and bishop to b5. And white has a lot of pressure against the black center. So I think white has a serious advantage at this point. So already after Ceperino's very simple bishop to e2, rook e4 castles, I think we can say that black is in some trouble. After rook takes e2, queen e2, it's probably, or sorry, knight c4 first, although probably transposes, queen a6, queen e2. Here, white is pretty close to just an outright winning position. And black certainly doesn't find much by way of a defense. So bishop to b7 certainly looks right. Rook a to d1 looks right, preventing bishop takes d5 because rook takes d5, and the pin d6 pawn prevents black from recapturing. Okay, well, what does black do here? I mean, his development is not very good, but white still has to break through. So black doesn't really have that many options, but at least for the moment he's got a little bit of a breathing space. So what should he do with it? Well, one kind of funny idea here is to play king to d8, trying to just get out of the way. If rook f to e1, threatening now to take 3 times, well, actually it doesn't threaten to take 3 times on e6 because the knight on f3 would hang, but it's at least maybe threatening to smash through on e6. Well, now king c7, and this is actually kind of interesting. So now finally black is threatening to take on d5, and all right, if white takes on e6, might be playable, but then we're opening up the long diagonal for black's very impressive looking light squared bishop. So white could play d6 check, and this is probably best, but here too at least black seems to have made some progress. Granted, it's costing him about 3 tempi, maybe 4 tempi, but he's now opened the long diagonal, and he's close the central files, and his knight can maybe come to c6. So king to d8, queen d3, threatening to jump to take the pawn on h7, king e8. So it's funny, at the cost of 4 tempi, black has achieved something, but it looks like white can use this. Okay, so knight f to d2. This looks like a good move. Threatening to go to e4, and of course protecting all the knights. And on queen c6, okay, f3 closes down the diagonal. Bishop g7, queen h7, king f8. And now I think white just wins with knight to e3, followed by, let's say, knight to g4, maybe king g2 and knight to g4. And the idea is to go to h6. And that threatens queen g8 mate, and if bishop takes h6, queen h8 is mate. So black is in lots and lots of trouble here. Probably losing, but this is a try. All right, instead of king to d8, black played queen takes a2. So as if he hasn't already taken enough dangerous pawns, he goes for one more. All right, white continues to build with rook f to e1. Okay, here black played queen to a4. If he tries to cover up with bishop to e7, it looks like white can make progress with knight to h4. This is a good move. Threatening queen h5, or threatening to take on e6 and then go to h5, and also with the idea of knight to f5, taking advantage of the fact that black can't play e takes f5 because of queen takes e7 mate. Okay, what does black do? If he plays bishop to a6, which certainly looks quite logical, then d takes a6 is very strong. In fact, it's most likely just winning. If here, for instance, bishop takes c4, then e takes d7 check, followed by queen takes e7 is a catastrophe. If f takes c6, then queen h5 check, followed by knight to d6 is winning. Okay, so black chose queen to a4. All right, and this makes sense. So it's hitting the knight on c4. Well, it was hitting it anyway, but it's also covering d6 or e6, pardon me, and d7. Yeah, not covering e6, covering d7. So that way he can perhaps play knight to a6 in some cases. Anyway, it's not an inspiring move, but black is trying to at least coordinate his pieces that way. They're both slightly aggressive, at least a couple of them, while also performing defensive functions. Well, here white finds a nice move. He plays b3. So this forces the queen off of the defensive d7, because if he goes to b5, of course, then there's knight to d6 check, winning the queen. Okay, so that takes care of that. And of course he can't take the pawn because rook to b1 and the bishop on b7 is lost. So he plays queen to b4, but as I said, now d7 is underprotected. So that after queen to d3, which is what Cheparinov played, now knight to a6 is no good. de, and on either recapture, queen takes d7 is mate. Okay, what else can black do? If he plays bishop to e7, trying to plug up the e file, then queen takes h7 is very unpleasant. All right, black has numerous bad choices here. For instance, if he plays queen takes b3, threatening both knights, then queen g8 check, bishop f8, knight to d6 check. Okay, yeah, d takes e6 is also crushing. King e7, knight f5 check, king e8, knight to g7 check, king d8. If king to e7, d6 is going to come to the same thing. So it's mate like that. And on king d8, d6, and black can play anything he wants. Queen f3 is certainly the most attractive of the meaningless possibilities, and white mates first. Okay, so queen takes b3 doesn't save him. All right, how about bishop takes d5? Well, rook takes d5, and on e takes d5, queen g8 is mate. Okay, so that's bad news. Bishop to e7 doesn't really help. All right, another bad, well, not bad. I mean, they're all inadequate possibilities. Another one is f5. This makes sense. So we cover the path to h7. White can play queen takes f5, but at least now black plays queen takes b3. Okay, but now we'll see that e6 is underprotected. So de, threatening queen f7 check, followed by rook d7 or queen f8, all kinds of great stuff. fe, rook e6 check, takes, queen e6, bishop e7, knight to d6, and if nothing else, we're winning the queen next move with queen takes b3. Maybe there's even better, but this is certainly good enough. All right. Okay. So let's go back. a6. This is what Salgado played. And you know that if your opponent plays a move like a6 here, you're in great shape. Now, the one positive idea behind this is to play rook a7 and use the rook to help defend d7. So that's the big idea. All right, but needless to say, this is just way too slow. All right, white plays de, fe, and now what do you do for white? So this is a very good exercise for calculation practice. So obviously black's position is really, really bad. But you still got to break through. You still got to win the point. So there's no material advantage yet. I mean, there has to be, you have to make further progress to cash in. Okay, well, the answer, or at least the best answer, which is also the one that Cheparinov found, is rook takes e6 check. Okay, the only sensible move here is to take the rook, queen d8 check, king f7, and now what? Here we probably have multiple wins, but knight to g5 check is probably the best. All right, if black takes, then knight to e5 check, and it's mate in a couple more moves. Whether the king goes to g8 or g7 doesn't matter. Queen takes g5, and now if king h8, then knight f7 is mate. This would of course be the forced line if black played king to g7. And here black also has the option of bishop to g7, but then rook to d8 is mate. Okay, so yeah, so f takes g5 is no good. Black played king to g6, and now white has quite a few ways to win. I mean, it's target practice here. See what you can find from this point. Try to calculate it out to mate if you can, or at least to some really, really clearly winning position. Not where you hope it's winning, not where you assume there has to be some win, but see if you can work your way all the way to a concrete winning position. Mate if you can. Okay, well, let's look at some of the winning lines here. Perhaps the fastest, and I think it's all with checks, is queen e8. Okay, if king f5 and queen e6, so let's just say king takes g5, f4. All right, if king f5, knight e3, king e4, queen e6, king f3, rook f1, king e2, and now you know there's got to be something in here somewhere, but finding it's not always so easy. So knight c4 check, this is the solution. King d3 only move, queen e3 check, king c2 only move, rook c1 is mate. Okay, so that's a long trip, but you have to check these, because sometimes, you know, the king has this annoying way of just cutting all the way through and then finding its way to safety. Okay, so king f5 we just worked out to a forced mate. Okay, how about king h6? Well, on this, we play queen f8 check, queen g8. Okay, now, if king f5, knight to d6 is mate. If king h6, the fastest win seems to be with knight to e5. So here, yeah, we have one quiet move. So this threatens, well, we'll see what it threatens. If black takes, then queen g5 is mate. Let's say he plays queen takes b3. Now we'll see the threat. Knight g4, king h5, knight f6, and then queen g5. Or queen h7, that mates too. Okay, so queen e8 is a clear winner. Queen takes f8 also wins, and here black's only a pawn up, so we can kind of assume that if black doesn't take the knight one way or the other here, then it has to be over, because then we're attacking for free. So let's see. If king takes g5, then queen g7 check. All right, if the king goes to h5, then we check, and then simply rook to f1, cuts off the king's trip to the center, and we mate like this. Okay, if the king goes to f5, knight to d6, f4 check, and this wins the queen, which is all we need to see, but in fact it's even mate with a kind of attractive mating pattern. Okay, so king takes g5 is no good. All right, if f takes g5, then knight e5, queen f7, queen e6. Okay, now if the king goes back, we have mate in 2. So the rook follows whichever way he goes. So king h5, queen f7, and rook to d6 is mate. Okay, so we found 2 ways to win here. All right, Chaparinov chose a third path, and this wasn't bad either, though maybe not as good, but certainly more than good enough. Knight takes e6. Okay, so he's threatening to take the bishop. The trickiest line for black is with knight to c6, but after knight takes f8 check, okay, if king g7, there's no problem. We just play knight e6 and we save all of our material and we keep attacking. If king f7, then knight to d6. Okay, if king g7, queen c7 is winning. So king g8, queen c7. And here it looks like it's tricky for a moment after rook takes f8. But white has knight f5. And there's no good defense to the threat of queen to g7 mate. If queen to g4, knight h6 check, thank you for the queen. If rook f7, well, it's not a queen, but it's a rook. And if the king comes up, he gets mated like that. All right, so a lot of lines, a lot of calculating, but the nice thing is you only have to find one line that works. As long as you find one line or one, let's say, one shrub of winning variations, that's sufficient. So Chaparinov found knight takes e6. All right, well, instead of playing knight to c6 here, Salgado played queen takes b3. And so at the moment he's up a piece and he's threatening the knight on c4, indirectly threatening the knight on e6, and of course eyeing the rook on d1. But black's king is more significant here. Okay, Chaparinov played knight takes f8 check, which isn't bad. Queen e8 check might be even faster. Certainly there's one very nice line here that I want to show you. Okay, so if king h6, queen takes f8 is fine. I mean, white's attacking for free here. In fact, it's a mate in 4. But king f5 is the fun line. Okay, so I'm sure there are multiple wins here, but the prettiest is with knight to d6 check. What in the world is the point of this, you might ask yourself? Well, certainly white's very happy on moves like king to g4, then h3 followed by queen to h5 is mate. And king f3 or king h3 doesn't matter. That's checkmate. If the king goes to e5, then if nothing else, there's knight takes c5 check, followed by knight takes the queen on b3. And finally on bishop takes d6, which is the move that makes knight to d6 look strange, we see the point. Knight to g7. This was unavailable. And now black plays king to g5 or king to g4. It doesn't matter. Queen h5 is checkmate. So queen e8 was very nice, and that was fastest. But okay, knight takes f8 is certainly good enough. King h5, and now Chaparinov finishes in style with the move knight e5. The point is that if f takes e5, queen h4 is mate, another very unusual mating pattern. If knight c6, threatening the queen and threatening the knight on e5 a second time, well, g4 check is decisive. If king h4 or king h6, then queen takes f6 mates very quickly. Well, it's mate in 1 if the king's on h6. If it's on h4, then it's mate in 2. King h3, and then queen h6. So king g5, and now queen to d2 check. Black can play queen to e3, which doesn't change anything. Ultimately, he has to play king to h4, and then queen h6 is mate. So, after knight e5, black played bishop to f3. White took. Black recaptured. And now the game ends very quickly. Rook to d5 check. King h6. And the last move is queen to e7. And black resigned because, okay, the threat is queen takes h7 mate. And if queen takes d5, then queen f6 check. King h5, queen h4 is mate. So, a very, very nice attacking game by Ivan Chaparinov, and a game of theoretical significance, too. I mean, it's put a main plan for black in the Blumenfeld gambit completely out of business. So, I hope you enjoyed the game, And those of you who play this gambit, beware. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.